Alright, hello and welcome to, I don't know what to call this, Minicast. It's like, it's somewhat like a podcast, but it's not like, I'm not gonna go super deep in it. What is it? Sorry, I'm multitasking here, just so there's something to do, there's something for you to watch while I kind of have this talk about, I something that I'm aware is a very hot topic. It's still, and it's gonna remain a hot topic for a while. And that talk today is about the Middle East conflict, the whole Israel and Palestine thing. Although I don't like calling it that because it's really not about the battle of Israel and Palestine. It's more of Israel fighting Hamas, and that's more out of a self-defense thing. But of course, there's been lots of like protests and stuff like that, and I'm aware that I'm like a few weeks late, and I waited to talk about this because I didn't want to like talk about there was still a lot of hot buttons being pressed, and the protests were ongoing on both sides. But a few objectives I want to fulfill today as we talk about this subject matter. A few objectives. The first objective is to kind of debunk kind of myths that have been like flowing through, especially like not just the internet, but like Christian communities, like a miasma. And so the first objective is to kind of debunk some of those myths that are flying around. The second one is to talk about the reality of why this conflict keeps going on beyond what you're being told from like either a political, economic, or even religious battle. And the third objective is to kind of give a reminder to primarily Christians, my more Christian audience, but of course, to anyone who's listening. So that's kind of the main objective. Let me just check something here. I don't know if you hear anything in the background. Whoops. Of like the game's audio. If you don't, that's fine. I am just gonna run World of Warcraft in the background, so you have something to watch while I ramble. Let me just mess around with this a little bit. Hey Tom, welcome to the stream. Actually, oh, there's no game on. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. It's pretty quiet. I could bump it up a bit, but I don't want to bump it up too high. Let me just fix something here. Where is this? Master speaker, please. Oops. No, that's not what I want. Yeah, open volume mixer. I have it on pretty low. See, now you can kind of hear it, right? Because I had it on pretty low. The main reason is because through my headset right now, the game can be a little loud, and so the main reason is because sometimes when I like want to play music while I'm playing this game, then the game doesn't shut out the music. Because I'm one of those, but I think you can hear it a little bit now. Right now, not much is happening, but there will be a little bit of game audio. It's not that important. If it ends up being too loud, I will turn it back down. Also, I didn't bother changing the tag, so if you were here looking for some Warcraft 3, that's not happening till Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. If you want to check out Warcraft 3, you can wait till Monday for that. But I'm just doing this to kind of do the game dailies and kill some time, and also something for you to watch while I talk about this. So, anyway, onto the actual subject matter. So, the Middle East conflict, for those of you who live under a rock or something, there's no way you haven't heard of this, but basically, Israel is, well, now they're moving into the occupying phase of the battle against Hamas and occupying Palestine. And of course, because now Israel is occupying Palestine, um, there has been see, that's what I was getting at. Um, it has the animosity between like the pro Palestinian side and the pro Israel side has kind of escalated because we've entered the second phase of the endless waltz of the Middle East conflict. And so I remember like back when this whole thing started, I was making this claim, and I was because of course you're talking to the streaming Parson, so everything I say is like a hot take. But I was talking about how like, I already know how this whole thing is gonna play out. This conflict with the Middle East, or Israel versus Hamas, is more accurate of how I'm gonna describe it. So basically, the phases would go like down like this. It would be like, first Israel goes in and they gun down some Hamas terrorists, and then they occupy the place, which is the phase we're in now. They're gonna occupy Palestine for, let's say, like 6 months to a year, and then during that time, Palestine will just have increasing animosity toward Israel, which is kind of what you're seeing now. And of course, like, one of the things to not get like too caught up in, if you will, is that a lot more of that a lot more of the apparent animosity. Oh, that is bad. A lot more of that apparent animosity is coming more out of like protesters in North America, but the whole thing about that is that it's really stupid. And there's a thousand reasons. Maybe I'll come back to that if I feel like it's necessary to talk about it. But the short of it is that it doesn't help what's actually gonna go down. So then after that whole like let's say like 6 months to a year will pass, Israel will occupy Palestine for a while. Then Israel will leave, because that's what they do. And then Hamas will come back with a new coat of paint, and then, despite spewing out the same anti-Semitic rhetoric that got Palestine into this problem in the first place, Palestine will still vote these people into their government, and then we'll just do the whole dance all over again. Now, with that being said, the first myth I have to debunk is debunking the myth that like, this is it, like, the things are happening in Israel. The second coming of Christ is happening now. I like, as much as it'd be great for Christ to come back, then all Christians look forward to that day. But I don't think this is it. Let me explain why I don't think this is it. The big reason why I don't think this is it is because we look at like this conflict of like Israel and Palestine, and this fight that's going on right now. Oh, this game is not gonna end well. I'm just gonna leave this battleground and go find a random dungeon instead. But anyway, the reason why I don't think this is like it's not the end yet, if you will, is because, contrary to popular belief, this whole like Israel sending in troops in to shoot down Hamas terrorists in Palestine, this is like an every other week occurrence to these people, which I know sounds morbid as frick to say that, but that's the reality. If you actually like read news of like in the Middle East, whether you're reading from like the pro-Hamas side, which you'd be a crazy person to actually believe these people, but they've been writing rhetoric about how like, this is the day we're finally gonna kill the Jews. And then you read from the Jewish side, the pro-Israel side, saying that like, oh, shit, here we go again, right? Like, like this is an every other week occurrence. And on a side note, one of the things that inspired me to kind of do this video stream thingy was I was joking around with a buddy about living in fictional worlds. So when you see those like posts on Facebook or Reddit or whatever, or Twitter, and people would ask, what would be a cool fictional world to live in? And this discourse came up because there was an ad while I was at work. We were playing the radio at work, and there was an ad for the new Spider-Man game, the Spider-Man 2 on the PS5, and it was talking about how like, oh, you know, like the game was advertising about like, you know, the fun of exploring Marvel's New York, and then I was joking about how like living in Marvel's New York would actually like suck a lot, because think about it. You know, you just want to go about your day, and then all of a sudden, like, some supervillain starts wrecking shit, and, like, things are just going terribly wrong, and buildings are being, like, busted down, because Spider-Man has to deal with the Lizard going on a rampage, kind of thing. Or, oh no, you know, Doc Ock is trying to concoct some crazy science plan that could destroy New York. And so, like, Marvel's New York would actually be, like, a terrible place to live in. Like, way worse than, like, you know, the real life New York, which can be rough at times. But in comparison, you know, like real world New York is like a paradise in comparison to like Marvel's New York. Or any like, you know, like the superhero universe is pretty easy to make fun of. Pokemon is another one where like, it'd be cool to live in a, like, you think it'd be cool to live in the Pokemon world, but try thinking that when you're walking through some tall grass and a 20-pound rat just jumps at you, right? We'll see how scared of rats you really are when you see a Eradicate gnawing through your ramen packs. But in all seriousness, it's one of those things that like, there's an old saying that truth is weirder than fiction, or truth is crazier than fiction. And the idea behind that is, you know, we may think that like Marvel's New York is like the batshit crazy place, but in reality, if you look at like the Middle East, like the whole Israel-Palestine states, in real life, those are actually terrible places to live in, which is one of those things that like I always tell people when they complain about like where they live sucks. I'm like, dude, if you live in like the US or in Canada, you have it great here. Because living in the Middle East, like living in Israel, it sucks. There's no other way of going about it. It sucks. Especially when like conflicts like you know, the Middle East conflict and stuff like that. Ooh, an instant win. I'm down for that. Oh, that guy is deader than dead. But you think of like how rough it is in the Middle East, and you should always be grateful of like where you live. If you don't live there, like I live in a small town in the west coast of Canada. It's really good here. It's really good here. As much as like, oh, you know, I could complain about like taxes suck, and there's a lot of problems with like the healthcare system or whatever. Yeah, I can make those complaints, but in reality, like, nah, living in Vancouver is great. I love it here, and when you especially compare it to places like Israel or something, like in real life, it does suck to live there, because in reality, this whole like battling Hamas, fighting Hamas terrorists through Palestine, like this is like an every other month occurrence to these people. Now, you might be skeptical of that statement, but we need to address another thing that is just a problem in general when people make debates about basically anything. And you might be asking, well, what makes this conflict different from any other ones that Israel's been dealing with Hamas in the past? And the simple explanation of that is big numbers go burr. That's the only reason why this particular conflict now is being like talked about more in the media by protesters, etc. And this is where I actually have a big gripe with like a lot of protesters. It's not like, especially in like in North America and in Vancouver, for instance, and protesters where I live, is that like, well, where were you when like this same thing happened back in August? Israel was fighting Hamas terrorists in Palestine in August, but no one said anything then. And not to mention, they were fighting around Christmas time last year, and no one said anything then. But the simple answer to that is big numbers go burr. And while it is true that, like, yes, more people dying is bad, like, duh, but I think it's also very disingenuous on both sides, whether you're talking about, like, the pro-Palestine saying that, like, oh, you know, a lot of Palestinian victims Israel bad, or Israel going like, no, we must be much more firm with like dealing with Hamas or whatever. It's like, this is like, once again, this is like a regular occurrence to these people. And so the take I have is that like, if you really cared about like the actual conflict and the strife between like people in the Middle East, I don't see people advocating for like all year round. I mean, to be fair, that'd be pretty tiring. So, I mean, I guess it wouldn't make sense to advocate all year round because it just wouldn't happen. That would be quite exhausting, and you know, I have my life to live. But like, I think the other issue that's just a big problem, I guess, is that I think there's just a denial of like how it really is. And if you focus on just the big numbers go burr rhetoric, you lose out on. It sounds so mean to say it this way, but I really can't buy your arguments if you just go big numbers go burr. Because you're also the kind of person, if you're only gonna make a scuffle when the big numbers go burr, you're probably not the person who really cares the rest of the time. And at that point, it's like, okay, then what you say ultimately has no meaning. Because you only talk about it when the big numbers go burr. But if you really are a person who believes in compassion, then you would be someone who cares about these subjects, like, all the time. I mean, or let me not all the time, because once again, that would be extremely exhausting, but a lot more often than what you see from, you know, your average protester today. Oh, this can't be good. But and so that was just something I was thinking about. That was something that I really, like, I don't know, had to arm wrestle with a number of people about, because I think too many people get focused on the whole big numbers go burr, which one led to the whole myth about like, okay, this is it, you know, Jerusalem, you know, Israel's in turmoil, the second coming of Christ is happening now. Like, that part of that is from the big numbers go burr phenomenon. So that's already a problematic stance to take on it. But the other thing too is that, like, the way I look at it is, you shouldn't allow just big numbers go burr to motivate your compassion, because in reality, that's not real compassion. That's where you get the virtue signaling. That's where you get the people who think they know what it means to be compassionate, but then they just, like, you find out they're like not compassionate at all, because they only say their compassionate stance when it makes them look good, but not when it actually matters. And so, with that said, I think that's my biggest gripe with this conflict. And the other thing too is that, like, if you focus on the big numbers, you kind of lose focus on where the real problems and the real battles lie. You know, and it's easy for the news media to spin on, like, the little people that are being victimized. But you can't just be like, you can't claim to be compassionate only in those moments, because unless you're a total monster with, like, no heart whatsoever, most people can act compassionate when you have the big numbers go burr. Let me paint it this way to, you know, move away from, like, Middle Eastern conflict. You can think of it in a totally different context. But, like, you think of like, men who, like, players, basically. The men who are players. What? Did I not loot them? I didn't loot him. Oh my gosh. The thing must have bugged. I gotta do another one. That sucks. Actually, no, we're not gonna do a random. Sorry, I just gotta sidetrack here. I'll get to my players analogy in a second. So you think of like guys who are players, and you know that whole like red pill argument about how women kind of just do stupid things by like they go like, why do women keep complaining about all the players they keep meeting instead of like, oh, I don't know, meeting an average guy and just settling down with an ordinary ass guy, right? But the reason why that happens and why women are like drawn to the players, if you will, is because players know how to utilize big numbers go burr. See, the average guy who doesn't like talk to every girl, and he doesn't like put his best foot forward and portray himself as like a high value male, quote unquote, is that basically the average guy cannot deal with big numbers. The average guy can only deal with small numbers. So let me put it this way: the average guy, when he wants to approach a woman, as soon as there are too many hurdles, he doesn't do it. So if a girl is if a girl's with like a group of friends, he doesn't do it. The cost is too high. The number is too big, if you will. The cost number is too big, so he doesn't do it. You know, he sees a girl at a Starbucks, but she's got that look on her face like, oh, you know, I'm just here to get my coffee. I got a busy day ahead of me. And she's got, you know, like, she's on her phone and she's calling up the, you know, like, hey, Jake, I'm gonna be at that meeting soon. Yada yada yada. Too many hurdles. The cost number is too big. He doesn't do it. She's hanging out with that one friend. Oh, he's my gay friend. He's so lovely. You know, we hang out all the time. He doesn't approach her because the cost is too high. The numbers are too big. He doesn't do it. The average guy, what does the average guy want? He wants to be able to like talk to a girl and just say, hey, you want to go for a cup of coffee? And I want to get to know you. If you think of like in a game of numbers and utilizing game theory, if you will, basically optimal chances and rolling your RNGs, if you will, in video game language, a guy will always go for something that has a low cost, where the number is small. But players and womanizers, they know how to play the big numbers game. They know how to play that number. Because, of course, part of it is that they want to get a high body count. So it's all about big numbers. That's how these guys think. And so the average person can't handle big numbers. And so that's why when people try and virtue signal in regards to like, well, there are bigger numbers in the Israel versus Hamas battle now. Now it matters. It's like, no, it has always mattered. But you just want to look good by claiming that you cared when the numbers were bigger. But you didn't care all that much when the numbers were not that big. So let's play the inverse of this. So the complete inverse of this is, and when I say the complete inverse of like saying how in the Middle East the numbers were small and then just escalated. Think of like the whole Russia-Ukraine thing. A lot of people forget that conflict is still going on, which is another reason why some people think like, oh no, is this World War III? We're having big fights on multiple fronts. But a lot of people just forgot that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is still going on. And it's been going on for a couple of years now. Oh, nice. It's been going on for the last year and a half now. And go watch that video I made of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I basically said the same thing there, where it's like, it's easy to care when the numbers are big, but what's more important is that you care about the individual people. And that's not something the average virtue signaler can do, or will do for that matter. But that's where you run into like, I don't know why this whole Middle Eastern conflict thing is as problematic to view as it is. It's because it was easy for people to care when the numbers were big, but when the numbers started decreasing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, people stopped caring. Nobody talked about it anymore. Because the big numbers didn't go burr, so there was no reason to talk about it. It didn't hit the news line. And so that's where, like, I don't know, I find a lot of people's views on the Middle Eastern conflict to be very disingenuous because of that. And this is I'm criticizing both sides of this. I'm criticizing both sides of this. And especially, like, and this is one of those things too, I guess maybe because, like, I don't know. I don't want to just speak from anecdotal, where, like, because I know people of rhetoric, which some people might claim, well, that's unfair, right? Because I have a privilege that people don't have. But the fact of the matter is, like, okay, like, I've spoken to people who have been in real conflicts, like the Middle East conflict, and see, this is where, like, once again, the Middle East conflict's been going on for, like, years. I know people who've been part of it. And of course, like, I mentioned this guy on my channel a number of times, a buddy of mine in real life named Jamal, and he was a child soldier once upon a time, and he tells me, like, you know, the conflicts that were going on in, like, Uganda, that still are going on. But no one, it's easy to virtue signal when the numbers go big, but see how those people really act when, like, once the numbers aren't so big and it doesn't feel like as if we need to talk about it as much. But I think that's a really disingenuous perspective to have if you think that, oh, you know, the numbers are not going burr anymore, so I don't need to focus on that. And, okay, there is some justification to that, in the sense of, like, okay, you know, you don't want to just watch the news and have only gloom, you know, then that's fair. You know, here I am playing World of Warcraft in the background because, you know, I want to do something else with my life other than just be, like, on emote mode all the time about how terrible everything is. Because, you know, you don't want to live that kind of life either, because that's where you get the pure nihilists that think everything, the sky is falling because everything is horrible. But I guess the challenge I'm making here for, you know, for all of you is to not be so caught up in just thinking, like, here are the numbers, that's why we have to, like, pay attention to this. Because I think real compassion cares regardless of that, and cares about the little guy. You care about the little guy in the midst of the conflict. Okay, so the next thing we gotta talk about, the second myth. I kind of already debunked it when I was debunking the first one. But the idea of, like, the idea that this is the end on a political scale. So the first, when I said, like, this is the end, I was, like, kind of debunking the Christian belief that, like, the second coming of Christ is coming now, kind of thing. I'm kind of debunking that because just because, like, the numbers are bigger this time doesn't mean that we're not in a situation worse than, say, like, World War II when Hitler was doing the Holocaust. You know, we're not at that level yet, and I pray that we never get there. But at the same time, with that being said, you know, think of, like, back in the 1940s when the Holocaust was happening. People thought the second coming of Christ was coming then, and it didn't happen. And once again, people back then fell into the same pitfall that people fall into now. It's just, well, big numbers go burr, therefore Christ is coming. That's not how that works. There have been many atrocities throughout history of big numbers going burr, but Christ didn't come at any of those times, because it's not about just when things go bad, then, you know, okay, here's a really morbid way of putting it. I don't like to think that the devil can just force God's hand, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is, you know, when people think of, like, oh, these horrible things that are happening, and the big numbers go burr, people tend to think, like, well, it's when evil happens that forces God to do miracles, if you will. And I'm particularly not a fan of that rhetoric. I think that undermines the nature of God and the goodness of God as proclaimed in the Gospels. And let me explain what I mean by that. So, think of, like, the Epicurean paradox. For those of you who don't know what the Epicurean paradox is, I mean, this is used in, like, tons of video games. You know, Epicurean 101 is the idea that if God is good, but is unable to save, then he is not all-powerful. But if God is all powerful but unwilling to like just fix everything, then he's not all good. But this works under the premise of like that means you require evil to force God's hand in order to do anything, in order to quote unquote prove himself, which is a really awful way to look at like, well, one, the person of God, and two, like spirituality as a whole. Because once again, like no one makes this kind of dumb abstract when you talk about like Buddhism. No one uses that sort of rhetoric. Because it just, the average Buddhist doesn't think that's like a talking point, because it is stupid rhetoric at the end of the day. The whole Epicurean paradox. And so that's why you don't hear a Buddhist ever make that argument, by the way, because it is a dumb one. But if you follow that logic, basically, it turns God into that whole magic 8-ball thing, where, or a genie in the lamp, where like, okay, God only does anything because of my particular context. Which the danger of that is it makes religion as a whole, which is why you also don't see Buddhists argue this, is that like, it makes religion more about you than about God, which is just a horrible way of thinking. And that's just self-worship, which is, you know, what leads to destruction and leads to a lot of bad things. And so, I don't know, I feel like a lot of, not just non-Christians, when I was making that critique there, but Christians also make this kind of like, they're basically, Christians are making that argument when they're doing the whole like, oh, all the awful things happening now is what's gonna force God's hand. But I quiet, Sylvanas. But I don't believe that like the devil can force God's hand like that. That doesn't make God all powerful or all loving, for that matter, if he only does things because the devil forces his hand. Kind of rhetoric. I don't believe that. I don't think that's I don't think, one, that's accurate Christian stance, nor is it healthy on a personal level. Because then you just like wait for the bad things to happen to dictate how you live your life. And to be blunt, that's a shitty way of living. You know, you don't live just to you don't live solely just embrace bad things. You're supposed to live to seek out the good and to find fulfillment. That's how we're supposed to live life. And so that's why I can't follow the whole like the devil forces God's hand. I cannot believe that. I think it's a very wrong teaching. And if I may be so bold, that is a false teaching that has bled into many churches today. And so that's why you get like like the whole 90s phenomenon where like you have a lot of Christians being reactionary in respects of like, oh, Dungeons and Devils is satanic, or listening to rock music is satanic, or whatever. But you get that kind of reactionary, that kind of reaction from Christian communities back in the 90s was because there was that kind of idea of God can't, they view God as being powerless, and that he only acts to react to the devil forcing his hand. But that's a very bad teaching. It's a very bad thing, especially if you're a Christian trying to proclaim the gospel to people. You know, a little bit of a evangelism 102 here, but never ever preach of the whole like the devil forcing God's hand, and that because then that makes the devil God, and then why don't we all just become Satanists because of that? But as you read through the scriptures, as you read through the Bible, it's like, no, God, if we believe in the sovereignty of God, which the writers of the scriptures obviously do, then you know that even when there's the face of evil that you're confronted with, your primary objective is, one, to trust that Jesus will take care of you, and that you won't be, you know, drowning in depression and nihilism because of the evil you see. And you trust in the life of the life and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then two, you show life and love in your actions because Jesus does that for you, and that's the application, if you will, of love God, love your neighbors, which I've talked about that discourse in every single Bible reading stream at some point. Because once again, that's what it ultimately comes down to. That's what the gospel is about. It's about how Jesus has chosen us to. He has chosen us to live his life for the people that need to see hope. That's why we as Christians exist. That is the Christian mission, is to be the Christ representative in people's lives that need to know, that need hope, that need the hope of the gospel. You're supposed to be that person. You're supposed to be the Jesus representative in people's lives. That is your duty. And so this obviously flies in the face of the whole big numbers go burr rhetoric that's going on when people, they claim they care about like the Middle East conflict, but at the end of the day they really don't. They only claim to pick a side when it actually matters and when it makes them look good. But honestly, like, you're gonna see in a few months, because as I mentioned earlier in this video, we're now moving into the phase where like Israel occupies Palestine, which, one of the funny things on a side note, and a myth to debunk as well. So myth debunk number 2, if you will. Now you're really seeing like a lot of the anti-Semitism in a lot of progressivism. You're seeing a lot of it now. And it's coming out of that whole, as I mentioned before, in the endless waltz of the Middle East conflict. We're now in the second phase where Israel now occupying Palestine for, let's say, 6 months to a year. Time is somewhat irrelevant. It actually doesn't matter how long they occupy Palestine for. The reality is that any amount of time builds up that animosity that Palestine will have toward Israel. And you see in, like, once again, like, Westerners on TikTok and stuff like that, and the whole, like, bogus ass talk about, like, oh, Israel bad because they're the militant occupier. And then all the hashtags of Free Palestine thing. But, like, that's where you see, like, oh my gosh, like, it's one of those things that, like, people claim to not be. When I mentioned this discourse a number of times within this channel as well. But it's one of those things where, like, when people tell you that, like, for instance, an example is like when people say, like, I'm not racist, and they have to tell you that, you should be very cautious of them, because it is more than likely that they're probably some of the most racist people you encounter. And it goes back to the whole big numbers go burr, right? So they'll claim they're not racist because they'll never flat out say, like, kill all Jews kind of thing, right? They'll claim they're not racist because they'll never flat out say that to you. But then when you listen to the rhetoric about, like, their opinion on, like, Israel occupying Palestine, oh my gosh, it's so anti-Semitic. And if you actually listen to these people, you're like, holy crap, that was hella racist. A smaller, not so serious example is where, like, at my workplace, if anyone from my work hears this, I'll probably get in trouble. But you know what? Whatever, I don't care. The reality is more important. So I'm that guy at work where, like, I play, like, the weird music at work. I play a lot of Japanese EDM because, I mean, those of you who've been following this channel, you know the music I listen to. Yeah, I play that at work because it's awesome. And for those of you who don't listen to D4 DJ music, you need to get on that because it's good. But anyway, so I was playing some D4 DJ music at work. And because of that, sometimes, like, my workplace get a little, like, they made a policy about, like, I have to be more inclusive at work. We want to be an inclusive environment. And that kind of thing. And, oh, are you for real? Horde getting their butts kicked again? Anyway, Uh, I don't want to rush in their head first and then probably get wasted. But anyway, back to my story. So, you know, sometimes I have to like play different music or whatever at work because of that. I can't just play like Japanese EDM all the time. So, anyway, one day, on a different day, I was playing Inori Minase music. For those of you who watch my Annie Revo video, you know exactly where I'm going with this. I'm a huge Inori Minase fan. You just gotta deal with it. Anyway, I was playing some Inori Minase at work, and we had one of the higher ups at my workplace come into the what do I call it? The main warehouse where the rest of us are doing grunt work. And you know, she heard the Inori Minase music, and then she said something like, "Huh, I feel like I've heard this before. They all sound the same." And I coyly said to her, I'm like, you know, if I said that exact same thing while you were listening to a black rapper, you'd have me fired. So I'd watch how I say stuff like that. Because what she didn't realize, and this is like, it's not just a her thing. This is like one of our problems in society, in our modern society, and the whole like people believing, like the whole like why you should be careful when people tell you they're not, you know, X problematic thing, is because they've desensitized themselves to the reality of what is like racism in this example. To the point that they don't know when they themselves act racist. Because they've deluded themselves into believing that like, well, I can't be racist. So anything I do cannot possibly be racist. And then they say the most racist thing and then say like, oh, but I'm not racist. So nothing I say could possibly be racist. This is the whole like, it's that whole Mary Sue logic of I can possibly do no wrong, no matter what wrong things I do. Which is just stupid rhetoric and beyond stupid to believe that. Oh, by the way, ladies, for any women in the audience, although I'm aware that most of my audience are men, but any ladies in the audience, that's how you know, if you want to meet a good guy in your life, a good man knows that he's capable of being a bad man. And there's a whole discourse of that, the nice guy versus good guy thing. If you don't want to fall for a nice guy, and you want to find a good guy, you find a man who's aware of how evil he actually could be. Because the man who's aware of how evil he can be is the man who will fight that evil to be good. And that's how you know you're going to find a good man in your life. Are you for real? You're getting wasted here. And so, going back to the Israel-Palestine thing, and the whole like occupation phase we're in now, and you hear people like, they just spew the most like racist rhetoric, and like, if you ever have that moment when you hear some of these like pro-Palestine side and talk about like why the occupation is bad, and you actually listen to a fair amount of their rhetoric, and you start thinking, that sounds kind of anti-Semitic, you're gonna quickly find out that's because it is. And there's been a lot of that going on, and I am somewhat, but not really surprised that like I've seen so much like anti-Semitic rhetoric going on as of late because of Israel now occupying Palestine. But it goes in the case in point of the sequence of events that I've described at the beginning of this discourse, where eventually Hamas is going to come back, because they do. Like, if you think about it, there are more members of Hamas than there is the entire population of Israel. Think about that for a minute. There are like, case in point is that Hamas will be back. They'll be back in Palestine. They'll have a new brand of paint, but you'll tell it's Hamas because they'll spew the same anti-Semitic rhetoric that got Palestine in this trouble in the first place. And the scary part, that you're going to think you live in some bizarro world, batshit crazy land, despite the anti-Semitic rhetoric that the new Hamas government will come up with, Palestine will still vote them in. And then we'll just do the whole thing all over again. When we're back doing this thing like a year later and Israel's fighting Hamas again in this level of like horrible scale, the only thing I'll say to you is I told you so. Because, yeah, in a year it'll happen again. Of course, next year we're going to be too busy with the Switch 2 for me to actually tell you I told you so. I'm going to be busy playing Switch 2 when that comes out. But for real talk, though, the thing will just happen again because to the final myth that needs to be debunked. And why most people on every side, whether you're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, why both sides are ultimately wrong. And that's my actual take on this. My thoughts on like the Israel versus Hamas thing. I think ultimately that it is meaningless. And this is why. The reason why this whole conflict is ultimately meaningless is because the fight was never about Israel versus Hamas. It never was. And here's a little hot take: when people, if you were to ask me whether I was pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, the answer I would give you is that I'm pro both, because I'm pro-human. I'm pro people not killing each other. I'm pro people being good to each other. This is where, like, I know I've gotten, like, arm wrestles with other Christians about this, where, like, sometimes I have too much, I'm a little bit too relaxed at times with, like, some of the company I keep, if you will. But that's because at the end of the day, you know, my Christian conviction is Christ demands that I feed the flock and love my neighbor. Doesn't matter who that is. And so that's why you may find, and you know, if you may have some merit if you think that I may be too lax. I'll give you that. But at the end of the day, that's because I'm pro people. I'm pro people not killing each other. I'm pro people living, you know, comfortable lives and being left alone and not being harassed to death. You know, that's what I'm pro that. And so with that said, I'm also pro-Palestine. I am pro-Israel and I'm pro-Palestine. But with that said, this is the reason why I think this conflict is ultimately meaningless. Because the fight is nothing to do with Israel at the end of the day. The real fight is actually between Palestine and Hamas. But I think the bigger problem is that most people do not see that. And because most people do not see that, this is why we will just do this endless waltz of Israel gunning down some Hamas terrorists. Israel occupies Palestine for a number of months. And then Hamas comes back with a new coat of paint, Palestine votes him in, and we do the thing all over again. This is why it keeps happening, because the fight was never about Israel. The conflict has nothing to do with them. And that's another reason why I think this whole, like, second coming of Christ is coming because of this conflict. The conflict is not about Israel at all. The fight is between Palestine and Hamas. And with that said, if Palestine, you know, hashtag free Palestine. However, if Palestine wants to be free, the truth, the hard truth, is that if Palestine wants to be free, they must be willing to fight Hamas themselves. This is not a fight that Israel or anyone else can fight for them. It is a fight that the people of Palestine, the people who want to have their land, their state of Palestine, if they want that, they must be willing to fight Hamas themselves. Now, of course, I say that, but I am also completely understanding of how difficult that is. It is a very, very tall order. And I always have this funny talk with, like, whenever I talk to people about any kind of conflict, like wars and stuff like that. I always tell people, it's one of those, like, miracles of older Marvel movies, which I know is a hot topic because I heard the Marvels was, like, beyond bad. And everybody's talking about, like, the decline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But in the earlier movies were really good, okay? Like, all the pre-Endgame stuff is, like, phenomenally good. And one of the best movies in the MCU is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And the fundamental idea of that movie is a movie that it really applies to this whole Middle East conflict, and it's one of the reasons why I would tell people Captain America: The Winter Soldier is a movie everyone should watch. It's a movie everyone should watch. Doesn't matter if you're not even a comic book fan, or into superhero culture or whatever. You know, you don't have to be a massive nerd like myself to watch that movie and think it's one of the best movies ever made. And one of the reasons why it's one of the best movies ever made is because of how truthful Steve Rogers' speech is near the end of the movie. The part where he addresses the SHIELD agents. He's speaking to the helicarriers communications, and he talks about how freedom is a high price. If you want to be free, you must be willing to fight for it. Of course, the pretext of that is also a brilliant scene made by Arlen Zolar, and Zolar's whole thing about how Hydra was going to take over the world. The best way for Hydra to do so. And Zolan reveals that, like, in order for if you try to take humanity's freedom from them, they will always resist. In order to truly subjugate people, you must make them surrender it. And so the Winter Soldier has these two ideas clash. The false sense of freedom, the complacent sense of freedom, if you will, and to acquire real freedom. And Palestine is at that point. That's the reality of it. Palestine is at that apex. They must make that choice now. Or let me rephrase that. It's not a now thing, but it is a choice that they have to deal with. And I think the big problem with Palestine is that they've been putting this off. Now, of course, I am sympathetic as to why it would be difficult to stand up to Hamas. I understand that. Generations of being their prisoners. The people of Palestine have been, for generations, prisoners to groups like Hamas. It is all they know. And so a lot of Palestinians have just accepted that's how it will always be. And this is where I know hashtag terrible pastor moment. But this is where, some people would tell you cannot rely on God to get you out of everything. And there is some truth to that. Despite my whole thing of always believe in Jesus rhetoric that I always spew, there are times where that doesn't mean that you can't just rely on Jesus to bail you out all the time. Let's put it that way. There is a fight you must fight on your own. You must do it yourself. And this is something that the people of Palestine must face. Now, of course, I understand that if they were to fight Hamas themselves, it's going to cost them. It may even require the ultimate cost, the ultimate price. But if Palestine wants to be free, the truth is that they have to fight Hamas themselves. It is not a fight that Israel or anyone else can do for them. They cannot rely on God to just come in and do it for them. I know that sounds heretical, but I think the reality is, if they want to be free, it will require them to stand up on their own 2 feet and face Hamas and tell them, this is it. We're not going to be your slaves anymore. We aren't going to be your prisoners anymore. We aren't going to be your human shields anymore. We're not going to be instruments of your desire to murder people. We will no longer be that. That is what Palestine must do. And only they can do it themselves. They cannot get help from anyone. As much, because Israel, no amount of Israel going in and gunning down Hamas terrorists will change anything. Palestine must root that out themselves. And it is a very high cost. It may cost them everything. But if they want to be free, that is what they must do. And so my appeal to you is pray for Palestine, and pray that they will be given the strength to do that. Pray that they would encounter Jesus and know and taste what freedom is like, so that they will pursue that themselves. That is my prayer for Palestine. That the Lord would reveal to them that truth. The truth of their circumstance. And, to quote Joshua chapter 1, do not be afraid. Be courageous. And there's that old saying, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to stand up to it, despite the fact that you're afraid. And, if there's any Palestinians listening to this, I pray that maybe it will, but I pray that you would seek Christ, who will give you that strength to be courageous, even when it's so easy to be afraid. And I would never shame a Palestinian for being afraid. But the hard reality is, if you can decide to just be complacent and stay in your fear, but nothing will ever change, and you will never be free. Or face your oppressors, your real oppressors. Face them and pay any price for your freedom. It is often said that it would be better to die on your feet a free man than to live on your knees as a slave. And this is the apex that Palestine finds themselves in. The choice is yours. As for my fellow believers, I just entice you to continuously pray. Of course, pray for Israel, but of course, we've already thrown them a lot of prayers, and we know that the Lord will provide for them. So, Israel good, but pray for Palestine now. Pray that the Lord would give them the strength to face their fears. And pray for the freedom of Palestine from the evil of Hamas. And pray that the Lord would give them the strength to rally up and find their courage. Anyway, that is the end of this talk and my thoughts on the Middle Eastern conflict. I felt like I needed to kind of talk about this because, one, I'm kind of really sick of hearing all the anti-Semitic rhetoric that's going on right now, and that kind of needs to be debunked. That kind of needs to stop. People need to stop being like. We really need to deal with this problem in our own home soil of the blatant racism that we're dealing with in regards to this conflict. That needs to stop. Are you for real? But, well, one, we need to, that needs to stop, the blatant racism that's going on against Israel. Like, oh my goodness, I've not seen so much anti-Semitism in a while. So that's a first. Secondly, I just wanted to clear some ideas out of the way and deal with some myths that have been, especially in Christian communities, has just been spewing oh my goodness, it was just bad. I'm like, why do you people think this, right? I know it's a few weeks later from Halloween, but it's the whole Halloween, everything is demonic discourse all over again. It's is the Holy Spirit so weak in you that that you view everything as the sky is falling? Have faith, well, last time I checked, I believed that Jesus was sovereign over all things, and that Jesus got, he's got this under control, guys. Like, chill out. God is good. That's what that phrase means, that everybody people may spew at church and don't know what that phrase means apparently. It's like God is good. Yes. He is our provider. He will take care of us. Things are gonna be okay. And so I just wanted to reassure a lot of, fellow believers that may think that just because Israel's shit's hitting the fan in Israel, well, I mean, now we gotta clean the fan because the shit already hit the fan. But now we gotta clean the fan. But now, like, relax. God is good. He's got it taken care of. And so have faith. But more importantly, we gotta pray for the freedom, the real freedom of the people of Palestine, and pray for the people. Pray for the little guys, the real victims, the people that have been used as human shields, and the people that are constantly brainwashed by Hamas. Pray for them because they need it now more. They need it now more than ever. And so that's my prayer, and I hope you would join me in that prayer, that the Lord would reveal to them the reality of their situation. As St. Paul states, our enemies are not of flesh and blood. Our enemies are of the principalities and evils of this world, and the ideology of telling you that things will only get better when you kill our enemies is not a good principality. That is a principality that we must fight. And so that is my hope, that you understand that. That's kind of my call to other believers. Finally, to the rest of you, I just hope that you have more of the facts kind of straightened out, and not to fall victim to the whole big numbers go burr. Because it's easy to see the big numbers go burr and think the sky is falling. But the fact of the matter is, it's not. We've been here before. And I know you might feel like, what do I do when the weight of the world is on your shoulders? And you feel like you're ready to collapse under that weight. The only thing I can say to you is, plant your feet. Plant your feet. Anyway, yeah, that's it for this real talk. I hope you guys, I don't know, enjoyed is not the right word, but I hope, like, I inspired something out of you, and I hope I enlightened you a little bit. Oh, I guess the last thing, I didn't mention this. I put it in the title of the video, but I didn't actually, like, mention it. And another thing that, like, the whole, I guess it was part of the whole debunking the whole problem of the occupation of Israel, or occupation of Palestine by the Israelites, I guess I should say. And people hating on Israel because they're the more militant group compared to the civilians of Palestine. But once again, it's not like Palestine versus Israel, right? It's more Hamas versus Israel right now, which is still the wrong conflict, but I mean, yeah, right? Case in point. But, we also want to keep the soldiers in our prayers, because fighting this fight, especially a meaningless one like this one, it's rough. It's rough on the souls of the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers especially, that have to deal with this crap like every other month. And so just pray for them. Pray for the souls of these people, that, hey, it's a rough world they live in. Marvel's New York looks like paradise in comparison to Israel right now. It's that bad. But just pray for the souls of these soldiers, and we keep them in our prayers, and remember them and their valor to defend themselves and defend their families and their friends. And so pray for them. and pray that they would find comfort in the healing power of Christ. Anyway, so happy Remembrance Day. I don't know. That's a weird phrase. I never say it like that. But you know, I hope this Remembrance Day allows you to reflect on that. And with that said, just a bit of housekeeping before I end this this stream, this mini cast, if you will. We'll be back on Monday at 2 o'clock for our regular scheduled Warcraft 3 playthrough. And now I'm at the part where the maps actually take a while, because that's just the nature of me and RTS games. But I hope you guys will come hang out for some Warcraft 3 on Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Next week we'll just have those 2 streams. I don't know if I'm going to do like a weekend stream or anything like that. Like today's was kind of impromptu. I thought about doing it, so I'm like, okay, yeah, I better do this one just to talk about it. But I don't think I have anything planned for next week. It's just Warcraft 3 for Monday and Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And that's kind of our regular schedule. But with that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I hope you guys have a great weekend. And I'll see you guys Monday. God bless you.